Welcome to the first episode of this mini-series where we dive into the most influential horror movies of all time. In this series, we'll explore the movies that not only shaped the horror genre but the movie industry as well. Some of these movies redefined what it meant to be scared. Today we're starting with the film that changed the game forever, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960. Psycho wasn't just a novel type of horror movie for its time. It was a cultural phenomenon that shocked audiences. It broke conventional filmmaking rules, laid the groundwork for some of the most iconic tropes in horror cinema, and created the arguably most famous subgenre of horror, slasher movies. In this video, we'll explore how one movie's existence eventually led to the creation of other fictional serial killers such as Michael Myers and Patrick Bateman. Hi, my name is Pat, welcome to the channel. But before we can dive into its influences, we need to travel back in time to before Psycho was made. To understand why Psycho is such a landmark, you need to know where horror films stood before 1960. Back then, horror leaned heavily on monsters to deliver the scares. In the 1930s, Universal Pictures dominated the horror landscape with a lineup consisting of iconic figures such as Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy, among others. In the 40s, RKO Pictures and Paramount extended the horror genre with curses introduced by cat people and ghost stories like The Uninvited, respectively. The 50s added sci-fi horror into the mix with entries such as The Thing from Another World and The Invasion of Body Snatchers. During these 3 decades, other popular horror movies existed as well, like The Creature from the Black Lagoon or The Wolfman, but all these movies are similar in one regard. What all these movies had in common was they banked heavily on the supernatural and the fear of the unknown. Back then, the source of fear were horrific creatures, and because of it, horror movies were sometimes viewed as childish. While there's nothing wrong with fearing the monster under the bed, inevitably, people grow up and realize there is no monster under the bed. These distant threats, birthed from vivid imaginations, were far away from the real fears the audience contended with in their daily lives. Horror movies then were reimagining of myths and tales of old to fulfill their purpose of a short-lived and cheap thrill. There was one noticeable exception though, the 1953's classic horror movie House of Wax, a remake of the 1933's Mystery of the Wax Museum. The movie was different in the sense that it did not feature a monster or supernatural evil, but a mere disfigured madman. Although it featured a more realistic villain compared to its competitors, the story went to great lengths to dehumanize the character.
But it wasn't like anything human. It hobbled and swayed like a monkey in the face.
I did see him. Just as I described him to you, he was incredible but very real.
No human being can look like that.
Back then, movies often tried to separate good humans from evil monsters. The advent of Psycho changed all of that. Alfred Hitchcock, already a legendary director known for suspense thrills like Rear Window and Vertigo, decided to take a different approach to horror. He adapted Robert Bloch's novel Psycho, which instead of supernatural monsters presented a far scarier threat, a regular person. Hitchcock was without a doubt a master of suspense, and with Psycho he took his craft to new heights. The film had a relatively low budget for a director of his stature, but Hitchcock saw potential in the simplicity of the story. He took the gamble and it paid off in ways no one could have ever imagined. Released in 1960, Psycho was groundbreaking. Hitchcock's meticulous direction combined with shocking plot twists subverted the audience's expectations, creating a never-before-seen experience for horror fans. With a brief overview of the horror history out of the way, let's focus on analyzing the influences that led to the creation of Psycho, Robert Bloch's novel Psycho. Psycho was adapted from the 1959 novel by Robert Bloch. Norman Bates, a disturbed young man living alone in a remote motel with his domineering deceased mother. Hitchcock remained relatively faithful to Bloch's novel, though there are important key differences between the novel and the movie. Norman Bates. In the novel, he is a middle-aged, overweight and balding man. He is physically unattractive, socially awkward, obsessed with the occult and pornography, and an alcoholic. Again, we encounter dehumanizing traits and the monsterification of the character to separate him from regular, well-adjusted people. Hitchcock, on the other hand, chose Anthony Perkins to play the character, a conventionally handsome young man. His portrayal was less socially awkward and with a peculiar hobby, but nothing too terribly out of the ordinary like occultism. Additionally, his pornographic obsession was toned down to voyeurism. Marion Crane. Mary Crane in the novel was just another victim. In Hitchcock's movie, the first half of the movie focuses on Marion Crane's theft of the $40,000, subverting the audience's expectations early on. The plot twist of a protagonist's sudden death wasn't just unheard of at that time. Even nowadays, it can throw people off who are experiencing the movie for the first time. The shower scene. In the novel, Mary's death is described from a more distant and detached view. There's less build-up and the novel does not linger on her death as much. In the movie, Hitchcock chose to have many close-up shots, employed a rapid editing style and made it a much longer scene, which made it stand out more and is now iconic. Judging by today's standards, it isn't nearly as gory or gruesome as other movies are, like the Saw franchise for example, but back then, showing such an intense kill was unheard of. Murders happened off-screen and a lot of it was implied or suggested. In comparison, the shower scene for its time was explicit and graphic. Psychological struggle. The novel spends a lot of time inside Norman's mind where his internal struggle with his mother is more prominent, revealing her to be non-existent early on. In the movie, Hitchcock cleverly uses subtle visuals and narrative techniques to hide the fact over the entire course of the movie that the mother is no longer alive. And even when it's technically revealed,
Norman Bates's mother has been dead and buried in Green Lawn Cemetery for the past 10 years.
thanks to his trickery, the mystery of whether she is dead or alive remains until the very end. While Robert Bloch's novel provided the blueprint for the story, Alfred Hitchcock elevated Psycho to another level, transforming it into a suspenseful, visually arresting masterpiece. Through innovative filmmaking techniques and added thematic depth that the novel lacked, Hitchcock improved on the source material and created one of the most influential films in cinematic history. Ed Gein was a notorious American murderer and body snatcher whose gruesome crimes shocked the nation in the late 1950s. He was arrested in 1957 after authorities discovered his house filled with human body parts, some fashioned into household items and clothing. Impact. The character of Norman Bates is largely inspired by Ed Gein, particularly Bates' relationship with his mother. Gein had an unhealthy attachment to his deceased mother, just like Norman. He kept the room untouched after her death and harbored a conflicting identity, sometimes dressing in women's clothing, which reflects Norman's split personality. While Gein only killed 2 people, his ghastly practices, grave robbing and body mutilation, gave rise to the killer with a mother complex trope which Norman Bates exemplifies. M is one of the earliest cinematic explorations of a serial killer's psychology, specifically focusing on Hans Becker, a child murderer. The film stands out for its portrayal of the inner turmoil of a killer, which adds psychological depth rather than reducing the antagonist to a mere monster. Hitchcock likely took inspiration from M's portrayal of an unassuming killer hiding in plain sight, a theme central to Psycho. Both M and Psycho explore the duality of their antagonists, focusing not just on the crimes, but on the complex motivations and mental illnesses driving them. Fritz Lang's use of shadows and eerie atmosphere also parallels Hitchcock's distinctive visual style in Psycho, where tension is heightened through careful lighting and cinematography. Film noir and German expressionism. Influence. Hitchcock was heavily influenced by the visual and thematic elements of film noir and German expressionism, which he encountered in his early career. These movements emphasized shadowy lighting, high contrast imagery, morally ambiguous characters, and psychological themes. Hitchcock utilized film noir techniques to craft suspense through lighting and composition. The stark black and white cinematography emphasizes contrast, giving a nightmarish quality to scenes like the shower murder. German expressionism's use of distorted perspectives and shadows can be seen in moments like Norman's menacing shadow looming over Marion. Hitchcock also borrowed from the moral ambiguity present in both genres, as Psycho leaves the audience questioning who the real monster is. Le Diabolique is a French psychological thriller known for its shocking twists and suspense. It involves a woman who, with the help of her husband's mistress, murders him, only to have his body disappear and mysterious events ensue. Hitchcock was deeply influenced by the slow-building tension and twist ending of Le Diabolique, the suspenseful structure of Psycho where the audience is kept on edge, with no clear understanding of what's happening until the final moments, owes much to Clouzot's approach to thriller storytelling. The ambiguity of identity and morality present in both films also highlight how Hitchcock drew from Clouzot's manipulation of audience expectations. Hitchcock sought to outdo Clouzot's most influential piece. Now let's talk about how Psycho directly influenced the horror genre. There are 3 major ways this film left its mark: the introduction to the slasher subgenre, the innovative use of psychological horror,
Now, he was already dangerously disturbed.
and Hitchcock's shocking narrative structure. Psycho is often considered the forerunner of the slasher genre. While it doesn't have all the hallmarks of a typical slasher film like a high body count or a masked killer hunting down teens, what it did introduce was the idea of a human monster. Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, was terrifying because he seemed normal. at first. Norman wasn't a supernatural being or a disfigured ghoul driven mad. He was a quiet, unassuming motel owner with a dark, twisted secret. This idea of a seemingly ordinary person harboring monstrous tendencies would go on to inspire future slashers, villains like Michael Myers in Halloween, Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th, and Ghostface in Scream. And it wasn't just the character of Norman Bates that set the stage for slasher films. Psycho's brutal and unexpected violence was a major shift from what audiences were used to. The infamous shower scene where Marion Crane is murdered early in the film was revolutionary. The victim was not only the film's protagonist, but also played by a well-known actress, Janet Leigh. Killing her off so early was unheard of, and it threw audiences into a state of shock. This sense of unpredictability, where no one, not even the main character, was safe, became a staple of the slasher genre. Beyond the slasher elements, Psycho is also deeply rooted in psychological horror. Hitchcock created a villain whose madness was hidden behind layers of normalcy. The mother subplot where Norman Bates was controlled by the personality of his dead mother was horrifying in its complexity. It was no longer about external threats, but the potential malevolence that lurks within every individual. Movies like American Psycho, Split, or Get Out owe a great deal to Psycho's exploration of fractured personalities and mental illness. Hitchcock showed that true horror could come from within. The shift towards psychological terror meant that horror films didn't need monsters lurking in the shadows to be scary. Sometimes the scariest things are hidden in plain sight. One of Hitchcock's greatest innovations in Psycho was the way he played with narrative structure. He intentionally misled audiences by making them believe Marion Crane was the main character, only to kill her off in the first act. The rest of the film pivots to Norman Bates and other side characters. By doing this, Hitchcock broke the traditional storytelling rules of Hollywood. Up until Psycho, audiences were used to a clear protagonist who would carry the narrative all the way to the end. But with Marion's death, Psycho flipped the script. The audience was left disoriented and unsure of what would happen next, adding to the tension and terror. This kind of narrative subversion would go on to inspire films like Scream and The Sixth Sense, all movies that delight in pulling the rug out from under the viewer. The iconic screeching violins during the shower scene introduced the idea of using dissonant, jarring sounds to elevate fear. This approach to sound design became a staple of horror films. I'm sure many of you can recall the Halloween theme or the Sharks theme from Jaws when mentioned. Psycho's unique, subtle sound design had a profound impact on the horror genre, far greater than many realize. Psycho is an adaptation of a book inspired by the crimes of a real person. The stylization and depiction of these elements paved the way to bring characters like Michael Myers, Leatherface, Patrick Bateman, and many more to the big screen. Not all's well that ends well. The portrayal of fictional violence has fascinated many for decades now, but for some, it sadly isn't enough.
Fortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our two friends. Just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke. I'm shaking. I stabbed her in the throat.
They discovered the very real malevolent yearnings these fictional characters harbor within themselves and tragically end up satiating these urges in real life. Now, the depiction of violence in media and its aftermaths are a whole nother conversation I don't really want to get into in this video.
Violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms.
That's another topic for another day. In many ways, Psycho redefined the horror genre, setting the stage for the rise of psychological horror and the slasher films that would dominate the 1970s and 80s. It taught filmmakers that horror could come from ordinary people and familiar places, and showed that unpredictable narrative twists could leave audiences truly shocked. Perhaps most importantly, Psycho gave us one of the most iconic characters in horror history, Norman Bates, a villain who was not a monster in the traditional sense, but something far more terrifying, a broken, twisted human being. In the next episode, we'll be moving forward to the 1970s, when a film about demonic possession terrified audiences worldwide, finally bringing supernatural horror to the mainstream. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. My name is Pat, and I hope to welcome you again in the next episode.